Hi, William here again, and welcome to part 2 of the 5th episode with Paul Howards Fluting Jig, where I'm going to attempt to do a double arc platter. Now this particular project was done in 2 parts. Part 1, which you may have seen, was about the planning for this project, and this part is about the execution of it. My military training, however, reminds me that no plan withstands first contact with the enemy, so I'm not expecting to be able to follow the plan to the letter.
Okay then, firstly we need to rough out the base of the platter, bearing in mind I want the finished product to be about 6mm thick, to make the router operations as simple as possible. Here, just adding the recess for my logo should the project turn out to be successful. Just doing some abrasive work here, from 240 down to 600. Okay, here just fitting the router cutter and checking the depth is correctly set to 4mm. Having decided at 30 iterations with the 6.3mm cutter, I've marked the outer ring on the index plate at every other position. So having done my safety checks and double checked the setup of the router and the index plate and made everything is secure, now we can start cutting. Not easy to see from the video here, but I am double checking the position of the index plate before I make each cut, because of course if you get that wrong then the piece is in fact ruined. For the eagle-eyed amongst you, you will have noticed that the guide bush became loose during the router operations, allowing the router cutter to wander off a couple of times. You can see that here, but actually it looks much worse than it is, and I think it's recoverable. Some initial abrasive work with 120 grain just to get rid of the really rough edges. I found a couple of abrasive tools which might help me reduce the amount of time spent sanding on these fluted items. I'll describe these at the end of the video. Having spent about 50 minutes now sanding this piece down using various techniques, I've got it to what I would describe as a marginal acceptable level. And also I've managed to tidy up the errors made by the router. So just giving the base now a couple of coats of acrylic sanding sealer, a denibbing between the coats, and finally a coat of acrylic gloss lacquer. And now time to get the item reversed, dismounting the faceplate and mounting it now in the O'Donnell jaws. So next stage then to level up the face of the piece to 9mm thick, and it's at this stage it's occurred to me that at some stage I've got to line up the existing fluting with the index plate. I've no idea how I'm going to do that. And now I've got that to 9mm, just need to abrade it now to 400 grit. Some acrylic sanding sealer, followed by some ebonizing lacquer. Camera here, I was just playing with a few iridescent paints to try and work out what kind of a finish that I wanted on the piece. Anyway, in a moment of madness, which I can probably attribute to too much thirsty ferret yesterday, I decided to go for a beige crackle effect. Well, the paint has dried very quickly in a warm workshop today, and the crackle effect is in fact quite amazing.
Okay, I need to pause this for a couple of minutes because there's a couple of issues arisen. Firstly, the finish that I attempted, the Crackle Glaze for the face of the project, turned out much better than expected, which has actually created a couple of further challenges.
Means in fact that it's going to need to be protected against the movement of the router guide bush against it during routing. It's also needs to be protected against me making errors when I'm doing the sanding in the routing grooves. And lastly, I do not want any lacquer or a high gloss effect on the Crackle Glaze, but I do need to get some varnish into the routing, so it's going to need to be protected from that process too. Now I do have a roll of frog tape, painter's masking tape to hand, which is very low tack and should not peel off the Crackle Glaze. So I tried a couple of pieces in the centre of the piece overnight and pulled it off and put it back on several times, and it didn't remove any of the glaze. So the plan at this stage then is to cover the entire face of the piece with frog tape, which optimistically will provide protection from the router guide bush, from the sanding process, and from getting some sealant into the grooves when I'm finished. Well, that's the theory anyway. Okay, at this stage I should be in a position where I can line up the fluting jig with the existing fluting on the reverse of the piece. However, I'm not, because I moved the router in the jig to the new position, and therefore I have lost the original position. What I should have done is to mark the new position with a Sharpie on the router jig and left the router in the old position so I could have matched it up with the existing fluting. So I'm left in the position now where I've got to keep jiggling the index plate and tightening and untightening the chuck in a position where the router cutter is in between the existing fluting. That's not going to be easy, I suspect. Okay, it didn't take quite as much jiggling about as I thought it would to get the router in the right position. So my concern now is in fact that the addition of the frog tape over the face of the piece is going to reduce the depth of cut to a point where it may prevent breakthrough in certain areas.
Okay, safety checks having been done, it's now time to start the routing process on the face. Wish me luck. Well, that unexpectedly broke through prematurely, which pretty much brings an end to this project.
The distance between the flutes on the face of the piece were insufficient, and that's something that I need to pay more attention to next time. I'm thinking aloud if there's any way I can recover this and do something else with it, but at the moment I'm inclined to think no. Now I decided to mount at least one rescue attempt for this piece, mainly because I was very impressed with the Crackle Glaze finish and I didn't particularly want to lose it. So I turned out this centre to make a central feature, did what I could with various tools from my Dremel box to tidy up the routing, sanded it down to 400 and finally sealed it with some acrylic sanding sealer and buffed the centre feature up a little bit. And so, not such a successful outcome.
My failure to recognise that the router cuts would meet as they came towards the centre because of the sweeping angle that they came in at caused the effect which you saw. They actually intruded on each other, and I did try kind of a rescue mission, and I only did that because I was quite amazed at the crackle effect on the piece. But again, I don't think this is going to fool anybody. Anybody who knows what a router jig does and can do is going to recognise the fact here. So there we go. Now, I posted a mid-project teaser on Facebook, and several people did ask about the Crackle Glaze effect. Now, I'm no master at this, as in fact it's the first time I've ever got it right, and that was almost by accident. So here's what I did. It was in 3 stages. First of all, I put on some acrylic sanding sealer and gave that 5-10 minutes to dry. Then quickly followed up with some ebonising lacquer, which because it's very warm here at the moment, dried within a few minutes as well. Finally, I put on some Plasticoat Crackle. You can get this from eBay and Amazon, or just about anywhere else. This normally comes in a 2-part. You get the base and then the crackle effect which goes over the top. I have got the base, but I've never used it. I used the black ebonising lacquer for some strange reason. I just applied this all within 30 minutes because it all dried and got the effect that I was looking for. An update how I've been getting on with the sanding of the fluting. I haven't made an awful lot of progress. I've exhausted the contents of my Dremel box, not much success there. I also found on eBay these 3M bristle discs which come in a variety of grits. They appear to be rubber impregnated with grit, and the ones that I bought are 80 grain, 320 grain and 400 grain. They weren't particularly good. I also found some Silverline attachments for the Dremel, and these appear to be again a rubber compound impregnated with grit, and they didn't do much either except stain the wood green in places. So thanks for joining me on this, the 5th episode with Paul Howards Fluting Jig, and I hope to see you all again soon.